Welcome to MSL Talk with Tom Caravela, a podcast specifically designed for MSLs and all things field medical. Let me start by introducing our topic and introducing our panel. So the topic is how to master communication skills to improve business relationships and maximize internal and external engagement. And our panel consists of Michael Kahn, who's Medical Affairs Operations Leader at Spark Therapeutics, Ruth Phillips, who's Vice President Medical Affairs of Blue Spark Technologies, and Brian Bishel, who's Field Director of Medical Science Liaisons for AbbVie. We were going to have Desiree Owen. That you might have seen on the LinkedIn invite that Desiree Owen was going to be here, but she had a family emergency. So Brian is filling in, so we got to go easy on Brian.
Please.
And just to give you a little more clarity, when I say live podcast, we are now streaming live on LinkedIn, but this will also be available on Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. And it's through the MSL Talk podcast. So if you are unfamiliar with the podcast, you just go to any of those streaming services, type in MSL Talk, and you will see this, and you can listen to it, share it with your friends. So again, we have a great discussion. Now, we are limited for time. So what I do want to do is get right into some of the questions, and then we're going to actually poll you guys, and we'll have a little bit more of an interactive discussion. So first question that we want to talk about is, what training practices, techniques, or trends have been effective for you in developing communication skills for cross-functional influence? And I think what I'd like to do is start with you, Ruth, because you're right next to me.
Of course. And, I think this is a really great topic. There is so much need for communication. And I think really the thing that makes the biggest difference is active listening, whether I'm dealing with internal or external customers or clients, really listening to understand what's being said, and then asking questions to make sure that you've actually understood what you think you understood. I think someone in the audience earlier said something very similar. You hear something and you process it through your own lens. And so asking questions to ensure that you're answering or responding to something appropriately is very important.
Great. Excellent. Mike, what about you?
I think she took my answer, but it wasn't really listening. The single most effective training technique I ever experienced was in my graduate business school training, and we were required to substantially research how to deliver a TED Talk. And then on a topic of our choosing, with the author of the book, who wrote the book, How to Deliver a TED Talk to the entire group. And we were graded on everything from content to persuasiveness to communication style. The preparation for that and the experience of doing that was so moving the needle for me that I've used it very selectively. You have to make sure that the person you're trying to train is willing to do that. But when they are, it's extraordinarily effective.
Great.
The book's something like How to Deliver a TED Talk. The author's name is Jeremy Donovan. I highly recommend it.
I think it's a great technique. What about you, Brian? Anything you guys doing at AbbVie?
Absolutely. And just a quick disclaimer, if you'll indulge me, all comments and remarks that I make are my own personal opinion and don't represent that necessarily of AbbVie, just so you know. And I think Ruth said something that is a phrase a lot of us are aware of, and that's this idea of active listening. And it's certainly something that is important, but I almost feel like people have heard it so much they tend to ignore it right now as one of those cliches. So I like to actually work with my teams on something called aggressive listening. And what that means is you're listening with an intensity and a purpose, as if there will be exam on this material in about 5 minutes. And it's important that you score a perfect score or something like that, not staring at somebody in a creepy way with, without breaking eye contact, but really hanging on every word and tailoring your response appropriately. Because especially new people traditionally in the field, they tend to give an answer they want to give that they training as opposed to the answer to the actual question. And so it's important to listen aggressively for that reason. So you are tailoring your response specifically to what is asked, not what you memorized.
And what about the good old fashioned role playing? I mean, does that exist anymore? Do you guys do that with your teams and give them an It sounds like with the TED Talk, it's almost similar to that. You're giving them an exercise.
I'm a big fan of simulation, of interactivity. Practice trumps theory with regard to communication every time in my experience.
Yeah. I want to make this as interactive as possible. So let's get through some more of the questions that we have prepared, but then I want to get back to some of the training techniques as well. What I'm curious to know is, what are you all seeing as the biggest deficiencies and skills that need to be developed better amongst your team members, whether they're new or seasoned? And how are you addressing this? And specifically, what's working well and what are you seeing as best practices? So Ruth, we're going to come back to you.
Okay. And I think Brian made a very good point about that aggressive listening. I find that my team tends not to have enough time because we're a very small group and we're doing 7 different things every day. So we don't take the time to communicate or to ask questions. And so I really like that idea of aggressive listening so that you can actually get to the bottom quickly of what you need to understand. I often will say, please, we have an open door policy in my office. If somebody has a question, they need to put time on my calendar. They need to call me or text me because I need to address those questions that they have before they take things in a direction that maybe isn't sound, or they're kind of going off the top of their head. And when you're in a small company, fortunately, you have a little bit more ability to have that kind of open door policy. But I also want them to know that they can share anything with me, that I'm not going to judge them or question why they're having those thoughts or questions that they have for me, that's a way that we can learn and grow together as a team.
Got you. And Michael, what about you? What do you see as some of the deficiencies and skills that need to be developed better?
Tailoring my answer to internal engagement, and specifically influencing others, whether it be cross-functionally or your manager or senior management. Sonia, you said something that really resonated with me in your presentation, which was the power and the impact of storytelling. We are hardwired as primates to respond to story and narrative. And yet the challenge I see frequently with medical affairs professionals, I trained in journalism and then in business, right? So I'm a linguistic strength. But I work with a lot of people who are scientifically trained, who are doctors, and they have a very different communication skill set. And often medical affairs professionals I see will let the PowerPoint slide or the material tell the story, but that's not enough, right? A set of data, structured, abstract, introduction, methods, results, and conclusions is not a story. It's a framework that tells a story. And so to be able to use source material as a basis for whatever argument or persuasion or inform or teach or whatever your communication goal is, I think that's probably the biggest challenge that I see, is bringing whatever you have to communicate, imparting into a narrative format.
Yeah. And not a shameless plug. We literally, last week's podcast episode was on storytelling for field medical affairs professionals. So check it out. But it's amazing that you just said that. Literally, we just had this conversation. And I think that we all in medical affairs, you have strategic objectives, and the MSLs are so focused on their strategic objectives. But how are you communicating that? Is it just, and I don't want to say the word data dump because I don't want to accuse anybody of that, but are you taking the time to prepare and to put those objectives into a story? that's compelling, that'll leave somebody with a feeling when you're finished, and satisfied and fulfilled in information that can help better their practice. So Brian, what about you? In your group, what types of deficiencies or skills, not necessarily deficiencies, but are there skills that you feel people need to work on more in this day and age?
Yeah, my answer is a little bit more general than the team that I work with currently. Just generally speaking, in medical affairs, I found that medical affairs personnel tend to struggle with strategic thinking. And it's a concept that I know a lot of people have heard. I'm not sure a lot of people can define appropriately, but for whatever reason, I've found that field medical personnel specifically have an inherent inability to look beyond 6, 12, 18 months down the road as to what the environment will look like competitively from a scientific point of view. What kind of data will be out? What kind of data gaps will exist that we should start to fill now? For whatever reason, they struggle with that. The good news is I found this is a muscle that can be exercised. There are strategic thinking exercises out there that you can do with your team. And the good news is most of them are kind of fun. The scenario based, they're problem solving, they're team oriented, they get up, they get people active. And so on a regular basis, I like to do these with my team, both to energize them as well as to teach some lessons about strategic thinking. And I also kind of, to your point of what you were just talking about, Tom, frequently come back to our overall overarching medical objectives, because traditionally these are rolled out in January after a flurry of meetings in Q4, and people will look at them once on a beautiful PowerPoint slide and then never look at it again. And so every month with my team, we actually pull these up during our team call and review them one by one, our top level objectives. Why are what we doing tactically? Why is that important? Because it ladders up to what we want to do as an overall objective.
Great answer. Awesome. So hot topics, as you guys know right now, are KOL access and relationship building. So how can professionals position themselves better when contacting KOLs, DOLs, and HCPs in general, gain better insights, and create lasting relationships? So Ruth, we're back to you.
All right. And I think this is probably an area I spend most of my day doing. As Vice President of Medical Affairs, I get to do everything. So I get to talk to our KOLs, which I love. And really getting to know them as a person has made a huge difference, where I can call them up at any time and say, hey, Dr. So-and-so, I have a question, or I need help with a panel discussion. What would you recommend? And they're very willing to take short periods of time. And as long as I am cognizant of the amount of time that I'm asking from them, I feel like I've got great friends for life, which is very fun.
Friends for life. Mm-hmm. That's the goal, right? Friends for life. Mike, what about you?
Full disclosure, this is not my area of expertise. I'm on the operations side, so I'm usually heavily involved after the interaction and trying to make sure that it gets recorded that it actually happened, as opposed to obtaining access. But what occurs to me, and maybe this is patently obvious, is identifying the areas of overlap of interest where the MSL or the medical affairs professional can help the KOL. Right? Do they really want information? Do they want to be, connected to latest data updates? Do they want to be an investigator? Do they want to be involved in an ad board? Whatever you can give them, whether that's information or access, whatever, try and deliver what they want, because the last thing they want is a sales pitch. Nobody wants that.
No.
I know Brian will correct me if I'm off base here.
But you're not. It's amazing for an operations guy. You nailed it. And by the way, I consider this panel friends for life too, as an aside. The engagement question is an interesting one. I have a lot of different tips and techniques I've learned over the years for my team. I always tell them to introduce themselves as Dr. So-and-so. It's not a demonstration of arrogance. It's just a differentiator from the commercial organization, which typically doesn't have doctorate degrees, to make it clear that your role, that your interaction, that your goal looks a little bit different. Second of all, Ruth, I love your point about being sensitive to time constraints. In fact, I like to teach my team to say that. I'm sensitive to your time constraints. It sounds like a mouthful until you say it a few times. But the reason for that is I think it does a couple of things. When you're actually in front of a doctor and you say that, it kind of turns off their brain a little bit from these patients in the waiting room and everything else, thinking that you're going to drain 15 minutes out of their day. And instead, they're willing to engage with you for just a couple of minutes. So you have time to hit a couple of bullet points, ask an open-ended question, and then get a reason to come back, and then you're out the door. And if you do that over a series of time, you build up trust. That trust leads to a deep, robust relationship over a period of time. So one of those days, you are going to get 45 minutes and be able to pull out the iPad and run through things because they know you are sensitive to their time constraints.
Awesome. Interesting. So in my job as a recruiter and in my job as a podcaster, I get the opportunity to ask a lot of questions to not just MSL leaders, but high-performing MSLs. And when I asked this exact question to MSLs, you know what they say? You got to get in their phone. You have to find a way to get in a KOL's cell phone. What's the closest way to someone's heart in this day and age?
Food. Oh.
Through their cell phone. Brian's going to leave his comments to himself. He has other things to add.
I thought it was food.
But no, seriously, and I know that there might be some controversy in me saying this, or I might be overstepping my bounds to a certain extent, because I don't want to come up here and be a total renegade. But in conversations with KOLs, if you can ask the simple question, would it be okay if I text you this information? Would it be okay if I text you to set up our next meeting, and get authorization to be in their phone and be respectful of that person's phone and their time in their phone? But this is what I'm hearing from successful and top performing MSLs as a differentiator in access and in their relationships. Does anybody agree? Does anybody agree with me? Show of hands. Is this something, we're not polling this, but you agree that that's a good, and again, it's not coming from me, actually. It's just coming from people that I'm speaking to. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go to a poll question, because I want to see if maybe we can get you guys involved in the conversation a little bit. So let's start with what percentage of your team is live in office versus remote, virtual? Oh, music. We got music for the poll question. I love it. This is so legit. Like, I'm so excited. I can't wait to see how this goes and get all this information out there. All right. So we have, and let me see if I can see this here. You guys could probably see better than me. So it looks like we have, wow, it's kind of split. And it looks like we have a combination. So less than 25% are showing. 56% of people are now live. That's more than I thought. Is that? Would you think that that number would be that high?
Yeah,
it's the other way around.
Less than 25%.
Oh yeah, less than 20. I was going to say that definitely. All right, that makes sense. Right? That definitely makes sense. This was just a curiosity thing amongst the panel. We just kind of wanted to see where everybody was out, because when you ask this question, it really totally varies. Let's go to the next question, because I'm eager to see what are your biggest challenges communicating internally with cross-functional colleagues. All right, so let's see. Again, can't really see this stuff here, but so it looks like the biggest one is a misalignment of goals and priorities. So that's a pretty big number. What do you? I'm going to hear from the panel. What do you guys think about this?
I'm fascinated by the answer. Is my first reaction, because that's an organizational design question that's very difficult for one person or one function to address, and the fact that it is this endemic, it's really, really interesting. It's a really difficult question until you call it to the attention of senior leaders to explain why something isn't getting done or is not getting done as quickly or as optimally as it should be.
Always the operations guy that speaks up first in a question like that. That's awesome. Thank God we have Michael here. And I'm forgetting that a lot of people can't see this at home that are listening. What are your biggest challenges communicating internally with cross-functional colleagues, and 58% of the audience said misalignment of goals and priorities. So yeah, I think that's a pretty big number. 42% said differing perspectives. So anybody else have anything to add?
I actually would like to hear from anybody in the audience who put that down as a choice about misalignment of goals and priorities. I'd like a little more detail on that. That's very general, and you would think there would be a certain level of alignment, but we have a gentleman over here who looks like he might respond to that one.
So my question would actually be the options that are given. I think that misalignment is a rather harsh term. I think the fact that you have different tools to approach similar goals and how you can communicate and recognize the fact that when you look at it from two different perspectives, it doesn't seem that you're pulling in the same direction, but it's more function of the tools that you have at hand when you're talking to somebody from operations or from one of your commercial colleagues, and you appreciate the goal, the strategic imperative, but you may have different approaches. So I don't know that it's a misalignment. It's just as a matter of aligning, recognizing where you're headed and how you can best get there with the levers that you have at hand.
That's a good point. I think it's tough when you do these polls. You're trying to figure out what the answers should be.
My steps. So.
Oh, there you go.
I was just going to comment because I said misalignment of goals, and sometimes it seems to be not intentional. It's just by nature of where they're situated. If they're virtual, there has to be a proactive place to check in and align the goals. And if those opportunities aren't arranged, you're just all going to be at different pathways. And until you realize you are, you don't really get a chance to align them again.
Well, Jonathan's walking. I'll contribute. There's always challenge, as we're aware of, in medical affairs and the commercial organization. Their goal is to drive sales to X. We're agnostic from sales, and so we may have a list of key opinion leaders or external experts we call on that don't have their quote-unquote prescribing potential, and so there's a misalignment there because they want us to call on those people. They can't suggest that, of course, but that's where a lot of that friction, I think, occurs.
Yeah, and I think that this speaks very well because of the last question, right? With 56% of the audience being virtual, there is only a certain amount of times that, that's something that we take for granted. And I was surprised with that number as well. I also put that because I think that's a very easy one, that I have my one-on-one with product on Monday, and then I'm going with the CEO on Tuesday, and all of a sudden there's a lot of time between those two. And I think that's definitely an uncovering of an issue that may be floating out there with such a virtual workforce these days.
I carry my own mic, Jonathan. Thank you.
Wow, man, you're a boss, man. You are
Drop
a
the
boss.
mic, no question, no comment. So I think I'm not surprised, on this number, as but it was a shocker, like Ryan, you said, when you see it for the first time, but I feel like it's also the visibility of the overall plan. Strategy, I think, Brian, you mentioned that the strategy is built and then that document kind of sits there. And how's the visibility of that overall strategy, overall tactics? Because sometimes people are just, working on a tactic, not looking at the overall goal. That's a priority for them because they're accountable for that, right? So I think the visibility of the overall plan and putting time and effort when we are building those plans to share that with everybody in the team, the full team, not just the leadership, and then follow through, and see if there are regular touch points where we can look at those plans and say, are we still on track? I think that might help, but I think this is a challenge. I do have one quick question regarding remote factor, and I just want to hear the perspective from the panel and also the audience who said that. So how much of a remote factor played a part, because we are still saying it's 25%. It's less than the other numbers, but anybody wants to elaborate on that?
So I can comment on something with that. So, as I was thinking about these options, the biggest challenge I'm seeing is people taking the time to communicate and having the time. And especially remote, what I'm finding is that we're trying to accomplish really large strategic things in 30 to 45-minute meetings. And just by the time that 35 to 45-minute meeting is over, you've got 6 more to line up. And so we can't actually spend time thinking about the stuff we just talked about. And so then it doesn't get done. So then we have the next 35, 45-minute meeting, 10 minutes of which is just remembering what we talked about last time. Right. And so I do think that when we were less remote, we were more prone to say, hey, everybody, we need to get together for 2 days and figure this out and have marching orders to now go execute. And I'm seeing less and less of that now.
I think to that point too, how long can you really sit on a Zoom call without, I need a break?
Yeah. Ask my kids during COVID.
Go back to back to back with different Zoom calls, but to have, an 8-hour day of the same group of people having those conversations about what needs to be done and what the goals and the priorities are, it's hard. We've kind of gone to a position where we limit to 2-hour meetings, and even 2-hour meetings are tough.
Yeah, I'll second that. The other thing that occurs to me about the nature of communication remote versus in person, even if you're looking into the camera and or looking at the face of the person talking to you, we know that 70% or more of communication is nonverbal. So if I'm really engaged and looking forward and really engaged, I just saw 4 people what? Because I just turned it. We don't do that on Zoom. If I do this and I was really disinterested, that comes across too. None of that. I shouldn't say none of that. It's really difficult in a Zoom call to do the things I just did to make a point, and to do that meeting after meeting after meeting is exhausting. So I have a mental note to do it in my Zoom calls, but you have to dose it out like medicine because it's not sustainable. There's a question you have.
Just a point I wanted to make to initially follow up the original point I questioned, and to support what you're saying. I believe that the remote nature of things, pandemic and post-pandemic, I think that there are 2 aspects to be considered. One is the quantity and the quality. The quantity of communication, to be quite honest, from my point of view, is increased. I mean, it's a problem, but you can't separate yourself. You're in your home, you're close to your computer. And, I had need early in the pandemic to put together a meeting on a Friday evening about 5:30. Well, if I was in the home office, it just wouldn't be a possibility. I mean, people would be gone. And yet I was able to put that together because people were at their home and they were finishing up their day and they would make themselves available. But I agree with you 100% that the quality of the communication is diminished. That from the standpoint of whether you speak of nonverbal communication, but that makes the perfect sense to me. The nuance that I was trying to identify there, and the example I would give is I was working with our market access individual, and we wanted to show the utilization of a particular drug in terms of its timing and whatever. And there just wasn't an appreciation. We agreed upon the objective, but the time frames, understanding how long it takes to agree upon an appropriate, even if it's real world evidence, an appropriate questionnaire, how long it takes to put that study in place and how long to collect the data versus I want access to this particular individual or this company and from the market access point, and 6 months is too long or 9 months is too long. That's not a misalignment, and it's not really a perspective. It's just an appreciation, a contextual understanding of the timeframes of how long it takes things to accomplish various things from different functions. And it's, as I said, different levers, different tools.
Thank you.
It's just following up from your conversation around body language on a call. What is your perspective of people who turn their camera off during a call? So you have some people on camera, some people off camera. I have varying perspectives of it. I know sometimes there's just too much going on in the background, and sometimes, honestly, it's a broadband issue. It's the fact that 12 people on camera makes the connection sometimes difficult. But how do you think it plays into communication, having some on and some off?
Personally, I think it's huge. When I can't see the person that I'm talking to, I don't know if they're engaged. Sometimes I've had situations where I've asked a question and had to repeat it 3 or 4 times because I know they're not paying attention. And so those questions get thrown in a little bit more frequently to keep them engaged. I do think it's much more difficult when you don't have that picture of someone right there that's engaging with you.
It is more difficult. You can explain reasons why. My expectation is always open cameras. But if you cannot, maybe you're traveling, maybe you're in an airport, maybe you happen to have a real childcare situation going on where you're just not camera ready or whatever. That's all fine. Just explain it ahead of time so we know, so we don't wonder if you're really paying attention or not.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing is internally, I think it's a lot easier to mandate in some ways that you have your camera on. But when you're dealing with an external customer at a site, boy, they don't like to put their cameras on.
Well, and there's legit reasons
Yep.
why. But to Brian's point, I think if you explain that and the group understands, then I think obviously it's better form. So we have one more poll question. Can we put that last poll question up? What are your biggest challenges communicating with external stakeholders? Cue the music. Yeah. All right, let's see. Wow, interesting results. Look at that. I'm gonna try not to mess this up. I messed up the other two. So what are your biggest challenges communicating with external stakeholders? We had 56% say access and unresponsiveness, and we had another 56% said everyone is too busy. So that there was a domination of people just being unresponsive and just too busy. So how do we overcome that? John, let's hear from you. What do you have to say there, Mr. John?
Hi, John Caskey, Pure Science. This is very much not surprising to me. I work with a lot of different pharma companies, and everybody is pushing a digital first program, meaning from a doctor's perspective, they're flooded with all types of digital activities in a way they never have been before. And on top of that, depending on the disease state, they may or may not be seeing people live, right? So it just fundamentally makes sense as a challenge. And I think that people need to recognize that you're taking smart strategies and pushing digital because that's the world we live in, but everybody else is too. So you need to be really, really purposeful in how you do it and intelligent about how you go about getting your stuff seen.
I would look at this as a challenge also because this phrase has been around for a while. I'm too busy. And to be sure, the digital world has changed things a little bit, but nonetheless, I don't want this to become an excuse for my team. Okay, they're too busy, so that's our status. What are we going to do about it? How are we still going to get in front of them? And there's a few different ways you can do that. If they have a specific disease state interest that may or may not even include your product, are you bringing back information to them of value from a recent medical meeting you were at about that disease state? Can you have an organic conversation with them about things that kind of in a side way get you to where you want to go with a product discussion? You have to be very creative to demonstrate value to get that kind of time in a very busy world. It's hard, but it can be done. Comment over here. Mike is way over there, so toss it, Jonathan.
Passing the baton here.
To your point, I don't know that there's separating disinterest from too busy. I don't think those are mutually exclusive answers. I think context is everything, and this goes back to one of the earlier points that didn't come to questions. It come to questions from us out here. But I think if you contextualize the questions that you have, the information, so that they're of primary interest to the key opinion leader or the expert or whomever you're trying to contact, that you have a much better chance of getting time on his or her schedule. Disinterest and too busy is, I think disinterest is just an extreme of, or too busy. Anyway, I think you get what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah. All right, so we have a couple minutes. So what I think I'd like to do is we have one more question for the panel. And this relates to the future. So what do you think engagement will look like in the next 5 years? And what trends do you think will emerge?
Unfortunately, I think more Zoom meetings and Zoom calls. I don't know that that's what I'd like to say, but I do see that's probably more where we're heading.
I'll beat the omni-channel drum and the concept that the way to communicate is the way that, in this case, the external engagee, the KOL, wants to be communicated with, whether it's Zoom or in person, or send me a downloaded packet. It's going to be customized.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can predict exactly what the future will look like in terms of virtual versus live interactions, but I'm very optimistic that it's going to be better, because humans tend to evolve both personally and in business to get better at things. And I think we're going to evolve to this point where we understand how to communicate a little bit better, whether it's virtual or face-to-face interactions, minimizing the length of meetings. I like to run my meetings at 55 minutes. Just in case you're back-to-back, you get 5 minutes to catch your breath. I know it doesn't sound like much, but sometimes that can make a difference. Little things like that, I think, make a difference. And I think 5 years from now, assuming, again, that epidemiologically, we're still in this place where COVID, while it's still a thing, is a little bit more minimized than it was 2 years ago, assuming that's still the case. I think it's going to look very much like it does now, but again, perhaps a little bit optimized.
So we have like a second left. I'm getting definitely get 4 minutes we have. So one of the things that we purposely did not incorporate into this discussion is social media and digital, but I couldn't resist. So what do you guys think about when we look at the future? Well, maybe not even the future. We look at right now, how does social media play and the digital opinion leader play into the communication strategies for your teams? Are we going audience or are we going panel? Someone was just pointing. Oh,
I'm sorry. I had just a comment on the future. Okay. I'm sorry.
No worries.
I was going to let you go with that part. But I agree with everyone with that, because I'm seeing the same thing. And I think that the new world of interaction, of engagement with external stakeholders, internal stakeholders has changed due to the fact where when COVID started and we all jumped on Zoom for the first time, that those of us that could figure it out, no one had their cameras on. Now it's getting to the point where it is a little bit weird unless you announce it why you're not on camera. That has changed the scope. Going back to what are we going to be like moving forward, I think we realize some efficiencies with that model, where it doesn't necessarily everything has to be in person, especially for our KOLs. KOLs now can determine what they want to do with their time and actually can be more efficient by doing some virtual, some in person. So that's just, I'm sorry, I didn't want to take it back.
We have to have somebody has to weigh in on the whole digital social media thing. Anyone who's brave enough? Anyone? Mandeep, we'll let you go because you have your own microphone. She's going to have to go.
No, it's just something that I feel very strongly about. Even before COVID, digital was something that I believe was a part of the future.
Right.
Now, not putting a timeline, because I think pandemic really accelerated a lot of those digital initiatives throughout the industry. So I will say definitely digital is going to play a part. And I think if you ask the question again about the next 5 years, and thank you, Michael, for bringing omni-channel piece, because that kind of plays a part in the digital conversation. But also the digital opinion landscape is going to expand.
Yep.
And we all know that digital opinion leaders are not technically KOLs in that case, right? So it might be someone from the HCP community. So we have to bring our organization up to speed on that level as well, because we have a KOL list that we have had it for a long time. And how to organize that, how to make sure everybody's on the same page, and also what kind of content is needed for that digital opinion leaders, because it's different than the content that we are developing with regard to some of the slide decks, for example, for the MSLUs. But I feel like that's how I see digital landscape evolving on that.
One more.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. So, at Acceleration Point, we're currently listening to about 60,000 HCPs in the social space for medical teams. And this year, we're at about 58% of them having scientifically relevant content that they've shared in the digital space. And it's not just that they talked about COVID, it has to do with the disease that they specialize in, right? So it's accelerating, it's getting faster. And the scary part is that there's no barrier to entry at all. And so, when we think about our job of sharing the science, making sure people know the latest and the most current thinking in the space, and that's what KOLs turn to you for, that's what DOLs turn to you for, and they're going to talk with or without your support. And so I think that we're just seeing this need to continue to prioritize.
Right. Okay, so we have to close this. I am going to add one thing to that, and spoiler alert. My friends in the data and CRM space are telling me that artificial intelligence and machine learning is going to actually curate all of the content that's being shared from KOLs right into the CRM. So without having to go out and find it, it's going to come to you. So in the future, I think that there's going to be a lot of digital tools that are going to provide the information needed for everyone to do a better job with their KOLs. At least that's what I'm hearing. So thank you all. Thank you to my panel, Michael, Ruth, Brian. I really appreciate all of your insights. Thank you to our live audience and everybody that's tuning in via LinkedIn Live. And thank you to Momentum Events. I appreciate you guys giving us this opportunity. Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed it, please subscribe so that you don't miss episodes in the future. And feel free to leave a rating or a review or a comment. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.